My name is Monica Twinar, and on behalf of the Center for Sustainable Global Enterprise at Cornell University's S.C. Johnson College of Business, I'd like to welcome you to the 7th Annual Cornell Business Impact Symposium. For nearly 2 decades, the center has been conducting applied research and teaching on the growth opportunities companies pursue through competitive strategies that address the world's most pressing social and environmental challenges. We offer a number of programs, events, and activities for residential students, and we are pleased to be launching an online sustainability curriculum through eCornell for the general public in the coming months. We are excited to partner with eCornell to host this online symposium, which is only possible because of the hard work of a number of people who deserve recognition. First, I want to thank my center colleague, Sophia Abdulhamid, for all her efforts that make this possible each year. I also want to thank Renee Bonamy and Dion Caldini, who conceptualized tonight's panel and made it a reality. It has been a pleasure working with them on this panel called Investor Perspective, Defining a Sustainable Company. We have 2 more panels coming up this week, so I encourage you to check them out. On Wednesday, we have Bold Moves, Turning Sustainability Commitments into Action. And on Thursday, we have FinTech, Increasing Global Accessibility to Financial Services. With that, I want to turn it over to Renee and Dion, who will introduce tonight's session.
Thank you, Monica. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to host this webinar as part of the Cornell Business Impact Symposium, together with Dion Caldani from the CSG Group and Monica Tonard from the Center of Sustainable Global Enterprise at Cornell Johnson. I want to personally thank all the speakers, the Center for Sustainable Global Enterprise at Cornell Johnson, and the Blue Like an Orange Sustainable Capital team, who helped us enormously in putting this webinar together. And also thank the audience and friends who are watching it. Now I want to explain briefly why I decided to organize this webinar. Before pursuing my MBA at Cornell, I have worked as financial advisor for Brazilian companies which were developing sustainable projects and needed funding from development financial institutions to leverage those projects. I wanted to learn more how these financial strategies would work in different settings. And during my MBA at Cornell, I took this experience further by pursuing the Environmental Finance and Impact Investing Fellowship and learned more about how finance, sustainability, and impact blend together. I'm passionate about sustainability and finance, and I have been collaborating with Dion to develop sustainable projects globally. It's our goal to support sustainable companies thrive. Now I pass my word to Dion, who will continue the introduction of the webinar.
Good afternoon and welcome, dear guests and panelists. What an honor to be co-sponsoring this presentation with Monica Wisnar, Associate Director of the Cornell Center for Sustainable Global Enterprise. I'm grateful to Monica for giving me and Renee Bonomi, my dedicated and resourceful collaborator, a second opportunity to bring you a group of diverse panelists to discuss the topic of sustainability. Its definitions are diverse depending on one's perspective, yet we can all agree that it connotes a long-term commitment. A big thank you to our esteemed speakers, who are all proponents of the idea that business can be a driving force for the improvement of our society and our planet without compromising on financial returns. I suggested that we feature them to tell their stories and their motivation for the work they do. I'm especially thrilled to feature my brother, Rashad, who has inspired me. Now that we are both advocating for sustainability, it seemed appropriate to ask him, a sustainable investor, to participate. I formed my company, the CSG Group, to not only advocate for conscious capitalism, but also to offer various services to impact entrepreneurs that envision sustainable, thriving communities. So thank you, Gabrielle, Kwame, Dave, and Rashad, and Renee for your participation and for all those who helped organize this presentation. I'm now thrilled to introduce Bart Thompson, our distinguished moderator and author of Do Good, who will start the discussion as she presents the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanne. I'm sure you've all had a moment to scan the panelists' bios, and if you haven't, please do so, even while we're starting the conversation. And once you do, I'm absolutely certain you'll agree Deanne and Renee have put together an amazing group for tonight's discussion. And based on our pre-call, it's going to be a really interesting discussion, and I think you're going to hear some unexpected things. As Deanne mentioned, sustainability is a broad term. And as COVID has spotlighted many of the systemic issues that a lot of us that have lived in this bubble for a while have been talking about for many years, more and more people are focused on sustainability and sustainable businesses. And as they have been, in the same way, my background's in branding, and the word brand has multiple meanings to everybody you speak to, the word sustainability has multiple meanings. And everyone we speak to views it differently. At the moment, it tends to be associated very strongly with green and environmental things. I personally like to think about it as a broader thing in the way Deanne mentioned, as achieving all of the SDGs as laid out by the UN. Rather than introduce the panelists to you, since you can read their bios, I would suggest that we ask each of the panelists to tell us what sustainability means to them as a way to kick off, and what drove them to get involved in a sustainable business, or in Rashad's case, fund sustainable businesses. Since Kwame is related to agriculture, which is the easiest place to start in sustainability, Kwame, why don't you start and introduce what sustainability means to you and why you're involved in a sustainable business?
Hello, everyone. My name is Kwame Marfo. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Bingo Farms. The farm was formed with a simple mission of seeking to promote food security in our region. And what drove me into a sustainable business, and I take the view that sustainability is beyond, seeking to, improve the environment, but also having impacts on livelihoods and lives. What drove me into this venture was I previously worked in a number of industries, primarily in financial services in New York and London. And I was looking at the landscape and identified a number of issues. Africa, in terms of food sustainability, would tick all the boxes. We have diverse agroecological systems. We have great weather. We have the trappings of what should be a regional basket. Yet, the vast majority of African countries are not able to feed themselves and spend hard-earned foreign exchange earnings importing food, which we could easily grow domestically. And the impact, particularly from Ghana, has been quite dire. The cedi has lost value to the USD for 26 consecutive years. That's primarily due to the imbalance between supply and demand between exports and imports. And the impact on poor and vulnerable groups can be quite dire, right? So you look at the US and Europe, people are talking about inflation running at, in the highest single digits. I mean, in our neck of the woods, prices could increase by a third, and the impact is quite, not great. So what drove me into the space was what I saw with people that I've come into contact with, and how, dislocations, particularly from the pandemic, impacted people from a food sustainability perspective. And as a result, I made it a mission with myself and my colleagues to identify the critical market and government failures in the food ecosystem and bring the resources, skills, and knowledge that I've accrued from my experiences in the West and other developing countries to see how I can make a difference.
Thank you. And for those who don't know, Ghana actually is a very young entrepreneurial population. I've had the fortune of spending some time there, and there are some amazing business ideas and things in there. So I'm sure you have amazing resources to draw on for your business, Kwame. Then we're going to migrate from very simple agriculture on land to the sea. Dare I say that Dave's background is real, because we'll all be envious as we watch him speak, but it is real. So Dave, why don't you tell us a little bit about what sustainability means to you and what drove you to get involved in sustainable business?
Thanks very much, Anne. Hi, everybody. I'm David Grossman, President and CEO of Panacea Aquaculture. We are a sustainable sea cucumber farm on the Caribbean coast of Panama. And what sustainability means to us is really a three-pronged approach. We like to say we're triple bottom line. I'm sure you've heard something like that before, but with us specifically, the first and very important prong is that you're financially sustainable. This is not philanthropy. We are running a business for profit, and we believe that sea cucumber farming is one of the biggest opportunities to produce oversized returns, because you have a product that has been overfished and devastated around the world. And now we are the first commercial sea cucumber hatchery in the Americas, producing a product that has almost unlimited demand, and it's the third most expensive seafood after bluefin and caviar. So financially, that's quite sustainable. Of equal importance, of course, are the other two prongs, which are the ecological impact. Sea cucumbers have been overfished for the last several decades. They've been a delicacy in China since 800 BC. They are, in fact, a superfood. They are amazing for your body. And with the rise of the middle class in China, the demand has gone through the roof. So supply has cratered as they've been overfished in every little backwater that you can find. And third, social impact goes hand in hand with these other two prongs of sustainability, because if you're not helping people and helping improve their way of life, especially with such an intensive activity as farming in the sea, then it's not going to work. So we have been working on our community outgrower regime, and we grow our sea cucumber juveniles in the hatchery, and then we seed them on the seabed, working with the community, monitor them, and we harvest them working with the communities. So our goal is that this is a very scalable activity that can work exclusively with coastal communities, which tend to be disenfranchised throughout the Caribbean basin. So it's a three-pronged approach. They're equally important. And what got me into sustainability or sea cucumbers, I'm originally a lawyer from New York. I used to work in finance. I went to Nicaragua in 2010 to mountain bike from Nicaragua to Ecuador. I got a little lost, ended up starting an eco lodge called Maderas Village, and a sustainable furniture factory called Maderas Collective. And since I am an entrepreneur, I can't say no to good and interesting ideas, I started fishing and exporting sea cucumbers from Nicaragua. I quickly found out this was highly unsustainable. This was the part of the problem. So I've spent the last 10 years working on how to solve this problem, on how to sustainably cultivate and produce a quality product to feed the roaring Chinese demand, as well as begin to offer some really amazing products for the rest of the world, because sea cucumbers are an incredible source of protein, and they do amazing things for anybody, whether you live in China or Houston.
Thank you. And Dave mentioned this is his third go around on a sustainable business. And one of the things I learned in doing some of my research for Do Good, which has profiles of large companies and smaller companies, that most of which are larger now, is that a lot of social entrepreneurs and business leaders focused on sustainability have a commitment. And it's not as easy to get off on the first time as people often think. It does. A lot of them have been on multiple journeys, which has taken multiple times to get there. So Dave is not alone in that journey on being on his third go round, which leads us to
resilience and persistence. Those are the right ways to call it.
And I'm sure Rashad will talk a little bit about the characteristics of a good leader, and those are probably some of those. Gabriel, you next, and he has a different element of sustainability that may not be in the space a lot of you traditionally think about it. What does sustainability mean to you, and what got you into a sustainable business?
For having me here. Actually, my family has a background in education, so we founded Rede Decisão, which is a network of schools with high quality at scales for unprivileged kids here in Brazil, South America. But I have no idea when I started Rede Decisão about ESG, impact investments, or the SDG, which, if I'm not mistaken, the number 4 is about ensuring inclusive and equitable education. But we knew it from our heart, and also in a lot of data, that we have a huge social mobility problem in Brazil. By 82 countries, Brazil is only the 60 in social mobility, which means if you look at the 20% poorest people in Brazil, only 7% will be able to reach the top 20. So by 100 people, only 7 will be able to have a dream about having a better life. You should call that like a poverty trap. And we believe we can play a role in that, because in Brazil we have almost 50 million students, which is a large number, but only 50% get out of high school. And out of 10, only 3 have literacy, a proficiency in literacy, and 1 in math. So we launched this network that cost almost the same that the government spend in education, in the public education in Brazil. We have no kind of benefits, and we now have over 8,000 students. And as David said, we are a for-profit company. We believe we have this huge market, and in Brazil, being for-profit, having efficiency, and not have a lot of relationship with the government, in our way of thinking, is the best way to have a long-term dream and impact our society.
Well, thank you. And as he mentioned, they're focused on 4, which is education, but that leads to 1, which is no poverty, and 10, which is reduced inequalities, possibly 5, gender inequality. So you start seeing how, even though a business may have at its primary core 1 single SDG, they actually span off, which is a nice way to put up Rashad, since he measures impact of businesses and things of that nature. So Rashad, why don't you tell us what sustainability means to you? What motivated you to get involved in sustainable businesses? And a little bit, actually, we'll segue into our next conversation at the end of yours, a little bit into what impact means for you in terms of investing in companies.
Well, thank you, Anne, and thank you to Diane and Renee for inviting me. Delighted to be participating in this panel. I've actually had chats with David in the past about possibly supporting his activities, which sound wonderful, and we're honored to have had this opportunity to support Rede Decisão. And Kwame, it sounds like fabulous activities. Perhaps we can talk and see what we can do. But the motivation for our group, a bit of an unusual name, Blue Like an Orange, was rather simple. We, a few years before then, the SDG framework, Sustainable Development Goals, was developed with very ambitious goals that countries need to achieve on health and education, employment, gender, 17 of them. And we recognize that governments have limitations, financial limitations and other limitations. So our challenge was to raise funding at scale to help achieve finance and achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And to do that, we recognize that we need also to achieve financial sustainability, meaning that our investors, the institutional investors who have the deep pockets, pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, and others, are seeking both to do good, to quote your book, as well as to make an appropriate financial return, risk-adjusted, but market-based financial return. So we need both sides, the appropriate risk-adjusted returns, as well as to convince our investors that we're helping achieve the SDGs through our financing. So we raised the first fund, which was dedicated to financing companies in Latin America. We're almost completed. One of these companies was Rede de Cisao. We're very proud what they're doing and their goals. And to come back to what you said, we seek entrepreneurs who are really motivated by these same goals. And you can tell when you talk to people, those who really believe it. And I had the pleasure of meeting Gabriel and his mother, who was, I believe, the founder of the company, and just a very inspiring woman. And I even had the pleasure of meeting her mother, who was also involved. You can see how it's in the family, as it were. So marrying a profit-making institution, but with a clear intent of supporting one or more, as you said, often it's many. We focus for all companies on environmental sustainability, on employment, good quality employment generation, on gender equality, and then on innovation. Every project we assess on these 4 criteria, and then we look at on the business specifics of that company. So for instance, the case of Rede de Cisao, it was education. So we've agreed on a number of performance indicators that they report on, and we monitor, and it's a very engaged discussion between our 2 groups. Or it could be a healthcare, agriculture is one of our focus sectors. Of course, renewable energy, the green agenda is one of, and then the financial sector. After we launched our fund, there is what we now call the new economy that became a very natural area for us to support as well. Lots of breakthrough technologies, companies that are trying new approaches to solve old problems. And this is an area that's blossomed as a very exciting area for us to support. I can get more into that once we get into the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you. So we hear a little bit about the perspective from the investor side of what they're looking for in impact. And Gabrielle, I'd like to start with you on this next question. How was that on your end? Was it easy to show them in the way that they were looking for to measure impact? Were there some gaps in there? And Kwame and Dave, once he speaks, you two can jump in too, because I know you have some opinions on this. So go on, Gabriel.
I take a deeper look on the social part. And I think when we look, for example, for employment pay fairs and workplace policies regarding diversity, employee trainings, it's more common. So usually you're able to benchmark and try to find KPIs that works for your industry or any industry. But in the beginning, even though we knew it, for example, our mission statement are very related to social, we have this, how I can put, you have to go deeper to try to measure in a very specific way what is the outputs that your company are able to do it. Even though everyone here knows how education can impact society, but For example, how are we going to measure that in how many years, and how we can bring to Rashad as an investor the follow-ups during short periods to make sure after 12 years, the kids that just started school in kindergarten will be like a very good professional at work. So in my view, in the social part, when you look for something that is very specific from your sector or your company, that's the hardest part. And you need to have a very open-minded conversation with the investor to try to find something that is that's meaningful, without being scared of, like, oh my gosh, but I'm going to have these KPIs or these goals, and I don't know how it's going to play out, because sometimes we are talking about people and how they develop, and this can take years. But I think if you have confidence in talking to your counterparties, your investors, your team, and try to bring ideas together, you can find something that is unique and can measure this on the short term and long term. So that's, I think, is my take, but David probably has a different view and he can add on that, and also add on.
So before Dave jumps in, because I know he has a different view, and Kwame actually I know can add to that. What was the importance of finding an investor that actually, where you had that philosophical sync? Rashad mentioned some of that. Was that part of the process for you in interviewing investors? I mean, yes, you think of the investors interviewing the social entrepreneur, but there has to be an element on the other side as well, no?
Yes. First of all, I came from Brazil, and we are specialized in very high interest rates. And this, in my opinion, make a difference when we look for investor, because we have to align very well the time horizon, because the cost of capital is very high in our society, especially in Brazil. So in Brazil, when I was looking for investor, one of the things that like pop up in my head all the time is this person or this fund or this investor knows what the education means, how long it takes to have like a learning outcome from a child, and they have the kind of funding that provides this time horizon for the company to achieve what is matters in the long term, not only the EBITDA, which is very important as well, but also like to be an enabler of our goals in the long term. So as my sector is very long-term driven, for me it was very important trying to understand if we are aligned on time horizon. And also, I think the company needs to know very well what they are good at and what they can improve, and try to bring someone that can be the balance. So, for example, Anna, for us, it was not very easy to explain our impact, even though it's very easy when you think it. So we said, if we bring it a fund that help us not only with funding in the right time horizon, but also knows a lot about impact and ESG, they probably can help us to highlight what we are doing. And sometimes we don't know because it's so much like natural from our daily basis activities, and this can help us in the long term, or at least sometimes make us having the checks and balance that guarantee that the outcomes is going to be in line with what we believe. So for us, these 2 points, I think, was the most important ones to bring a partner and bring an investor to our company.
So the partner piece actually was important. Dave, you've had some slightly different experiences, if I can be so bold to say that. Have your experiences been in speaking with investors and potentially shifting from friends and family into, or philanthropic investment into larger institutional investment?
Sure. Well, first of all, I have to say that we've been very blessed with friends and family and sophisticated investors that were willing to take a leap of faith. There's no other way to say it when you have an innovative new business model, and the first question is, what the hell is a sea cucumber? You know, it's like you're in for a lot of education. You can ask anybody in China what a sea cucumber is, and they'll say, they get very excited because it's so popular and part of their cuisine and Eastern medicine. So on the investor side, to get to proof of concept, we have had to rely on a number of amazing investors that were able to take some early risk, because we are the first company in the Americas to commercially cultivate these species. There's 35 sea cucumber hatcheries outside of China. So there are more established practices for other species. Here in the Americas, we are the only one. So I can show financial models explaining why selling even at a cheap price of $150 a kilo wholesale and having an 80% gross margin is an excellent business model. Until you do it, until you have proof of concept, you have to rely on people and investors that are willing to take a leap of faith. We're at the stage now where we have proven concept. We are successfully cultivating and producing juvenile sea cucumbers. We've begun putting them into the ocean to farm them. Since it's an 18-month growth cycle to get to commercial size, it still requires some more faith, right? Because typically institutional investors of any size like to see revenue. And I find that a stumbling block for innovative, sustainable businesses. And at some point, I would try to rally the participants and the impact investors out there to tolerate a bit more risk and bet on the leaders and their teams who are so passionate and informed. It's not just me. I've been chasing this for 10 years and now it's finally working, but we have the best group of leading experts. I mean, there's not so many experts on sea cucumber cultivation, but they're all associated with us because we were all driven. And equally, I would say on the impact side, because it's quite logical that putting sea cucumbers back in the water where they have been overfished and almost driven to extinction is a sustainable activity, right? Sea cucumbers are the vacuum cleaners of the sea. They help buffer against ocean acidification in a very real way. They help prevent algae blooms. They protect reef where sea cucumbers are present. Seagrass grows 8 times faster, which is the real activity sequestering carbon, right? So sea cucumbers are so important, but in KPIs or impact metrics, especially for a startup, it costs a lot of money to measure your impact. I can tell you that we have about 50% women working in our company, and we're working mainly with the local community. I can tell you how much carbon is sequestered by an acre of seaweed farming, but I would need to spend about $50,000 to tell you exactly the impact of carbon sequestration and nitrogen and biodiversity to run the per hectare or acre impact of a sea cucumber, because nobody has been able to do that. But obviously, it's sustainable. We have had the benefit of getting involved with some institutions who have helped us, and that's key. The Inter-American Development Bank has been working with us for a bit over a year, and they have brought some resources and expertise and help fund us to work with the community to monitor the environment where we're working to get a better snapshot of what the state of the seabed and the ecosystem is where we're working. We have a full sustainability strategy and report. We've been working with some amazing experts, which I will share with you, Rashad, and anybody else who would like to see. We would not have been able to do that with our scrappy startup team. That scrappy startup team was focused on being able to consistently produce happy, healthy, juvenile sea cucumbers. That's the secret sauce. Measuring the impact is always kind of a lagging activity, even when it's so logical and important for this. So that has been my experience. And even once you show the impact, because now I have great reports that we've generated videos from the Inter-American Development Bank. And with proven concept, we're still right at the tipping point to be able to receive institutional investment. We've been speaking with a lot of different firms. The risk has gone down tremendously, and it's working. You know, the business is working, but it'll still be realistically a year before we start exporting real commercial volumes of sea cucumbers, because it's an 18-month cycle. So from the business side, you know, that we can bend over backwards and explain all of the details about why a business makes sense financially, or why the impact is in fact very real. But there's a wide gap between where, in my experience, where institutional impact investors are comfortable, and where companies even get to proof of concept and really need the cash then, right, to scale up, which is right where we are right now, because the solution, or the impact, needs to be proportional to the problem. And the ocean is dying; half the coral reefs are gone already. But right now we have the capacity to do 1-2 million sea cucumbers, but with a little bit of investment, which we're working through right now, we could do tens of millions, hundreds of millions of sea cucumbers, and that makes a measurable impact mitigating against climate change by regulating the pH of the ocean. It's a big deal. And by the way, it's the third most expensive seafood in the world. So it just checks all the boxes. But when you're the first, you have to answer that question always: what the hell is a sea cucumber anyway? And then you take it from there. Why do I care? You know.
Thank you, Kwame.
And I'm happy to answer that.
Why you do care? Yeah, Kwame, what has been your experience with measuring impact on ground as compared to what some of the investors you've spoken to have asked about?
Thank you. So I do appreciate Rashad's approach. It is born out of a deep set of convictions, and also, at least from what I heard, it's very localized, right? It's informed by experiences on the ground. He has boots on the ground, so there's a very localized understanding of the environment. I came to this view the long way. I mean, prior to going into agriculture, I did run a micro investment vehicle leveraging citizen capital from African diaspora, and invested in businesses back home. And when we started in London, subsequently moved to New York, we had a number of impact metrics: job creation, livelihood improvement, poverty alleviation. And if you ask me, how did I come across those impact metrics with my team? We literally, stuck a finger in the air, and there was a feel-good feel to it. But in my travel and experiences on the continent, in Accra, Dakar, Lagos, Abidjan, three things came up in my interactions with entrepreneurs, which was jobs, jobs, jobs. What became obvious in my discourse was people were looking for employment opportunities, the resources that come with it, and the agency to make informed decisions, as opposed to, a well-meaning some outsider coming in and telling them, well, you need a bed net, So that was really what led me to focus on agriculture, because it's demonstrated among various industries to have the highest job multiplier in the private sector. Unfortunately, my experiences in some of the investors that we've dealt with, some want to focus on technology intensity. It's great, but technology is supposed to be an enabler. If the supply side isn't taken care of, there is very little to enable. You talk to others, they only want to do 5 million ticket sizes or more. Good luck. The deal flow is few and far between. Companies that meet those thresholds probably do have options. And to Gabriel's point, we live in markets, or do business markets, where due to in our case, government failure, government competing with the private sector for funding, the cost of credit. Well, one, credit is unavailable, and if it is, the cost is exorbitant. Outrageously expensive. You took some investors, certain approaches to smallholder farming, which is great, but some of these approaches seem to eschew any form of commercialization. And for Africa to become a net food exporter, there has to be technology, there has to be mechanization, there has to be equipment. But you took some investors, they don't want to hear it, which is very far removed from, the realities of the ground. Others have, certain views on work in the savannah, to be able to do commercial farming or do it on a large scale. There has to be some element of dislocation of, some fauna, where you might have to get rid of some and replant them in other places that are more conducive. Some don't want to hear it. We had there's one DFI that has been a very vocal supporter. We are in a project with them, but then the timing of approving certain aspects of their delivery, just, it's been quite slow. And as a farmer, you are unfortunately bound by subject to the elements, right? If the rains come and you don't plant, you could be out of luck until next year, But then in some cases, approvals of certain aspects of the project have come in late, and by the time they come in, it's of no good, So I think where I would like to see the community move is more dialogue, understanding local context, engaging us and learning from experiences, and frankly also having some element of humility to appreciate the fact that things might look different when you're sitting in the ivory towers in London and New York, but the reality on the ground, it's not always as it seems from the ivory towers.
So that's interesting. So, the word we often hear, especially in the wake of COVID, is compassion, but humility and understanding the difference in context, and putting yourself in the shoes of the entrepreneur is actually a really interesting point. That humility, it's not that you're the God and we're the people who need help. It's about bringing everything equal and giving agency to everyone in an equal manner. I'm hearing some themes in here that are about trust, time horizon, and dare I say at this moment that we have geoeconomic politics and geopolitics. Rashad, how do those three things come into play when you're evaluating companies? And again, that's time horizon, trust, and that element of geoeconomic politics.
First, we realize, first of all, we're startups. I feel for David and Kwame and previously Gabrielle. So we know how tough it is to start a business and convince the people you want to invest in you. So I certainly understand that. And so, but there are different risks for different groups. So the risk profile that we established is one, very much what Gabrielle referred to, providing long-term capital for businesses, not only just long-term, but without revealing too much details. One of the things we provide is long grace periods, not only on principal, which is a bit more common, but even on the payment of interest. So we agree on an interest rate, but then we give a deferment for many years to allow the company to get up to scale. So certainly I appreciate that need for long period of financing. We try to scout to the extent possible our financing to what the client needs. That's where sometimes there may be difference of views and maybe we don't reach an agreement. We're not equity investors. We're a different risk profile. And the last thing I wanted to mention is on the point of size. It is an issue. Economic scale is relevant for any business. So recognizing this, like many others, whether it's DFIs or other groups like us, we try to work through financial intermediaries to get to small scale. So one of the companies we financed, it's in Mexico, it is a fintech, and they provide loans between 500 and 2,500. And many is to individuals. And many of these individuals, through research, they found out that they actually are funding their own businesses. They're not micro, they're a bit bigger than micro.
I think it's similar to microfinance in a way.
We're looking also at a microfinance traditional model group lending to women. But we also put a lot of emphasis on development of SMEs through intermediaries or financial. So companies that would provide between 50 and let's say 250 or $1 million. But each institution has to find their right balance. So we are perhaps for you a little larger, but there are even other organizations provide even far larger financing. Our niche is more, I would say, medium-scale enterprise like Rede Decisa.
No, thank you. And how do the geopolitical elements come into play, especially at a moment now when they're so central to people's viewpoints and context?
Well, it's very important. I worked for 25 years at the IFC, and there were two major determinants to our success. One is the quality of the either the shareholders, not either, the shareholders and the management. So the integrity and quality. But the other was the country risk, if you will, the geopolitical risks. If countries fell apart because of internal reasons or sometimes due to external reasons, and that played a major factor. So Latin America has gone through major financial crises. Gabrielle alluded to that indirectly with the high interest rates and, of course, African countries. So it is a factor that we take into account, how politically stable, the stability of the regulatory environment. These are all very important factors. But we know part of what we're about is assuming some of those risks, taking a long-term view. So we try to balance between the more established countries in the region or regions, because we're starting to invest in Africa as well, and some more risky. So we take a portfolio approach.
Thank you. So we're coming on to about 12 minutes left. So I think it's a good moment, unless anyone has one last thing that they want to add to what we've had in our discussion so far. I know we could have a discussion on our own for another hour or so, especially given our pre-call, but anyone have a last minute thing to say? Otherwise, I'll open it up to the floor.
To
I would,
we have two.
Go ahead, David.
I would just add that even with different risks, whether it's country risk or other risks, I think that there's also innovative ways to reduce those. For example, I spent 10 years in Nicaragua, and Nicaragua is not the most stable country right now, which is why I came to Panama 4 years ago. However, since if you can think about this as a farm, we can create our seed here in Panama, and we can still sow it in Nicaragua or Puerto Rico or Haiti or the Dominican Republic. So I think that it's good for the entrepreneurs and also the funds to think about innovative ways to reduce that risk, other than just giving the money with good terms and a grace period is awesome. But there are ways to collaborate to kind of spread that risk out or diminish it by working with like-minded people and companies and putting the assets in the right place, and light operations in other places. That's kind of our plan as it is.
So there's a way to spread the risk so that it actually isn't
Absolutely
concentrated. Yeah. Gabrielle?
just to add on Hashad and also David, I think like if you know the entrepreneur, and even though you have like a country risk, but you have like people on the ground that understands the differences and sometimes what is a real risk, not having only a top-down approach, but a bottom-up, and knowing, okay, the entrepreneur, the country, which risks are real risks and not only what we are reading in the newspaper. I think this can be an advantage for an investor because sometimes they are having a more specific approach. And this also should pay returns higher than a top-down approach.
Thank you. Kwame, anything to add in this?
Yeah, the impact from the current situation in Ukraine has been quite dire. Cost of input, a bag of fertilizer used to go for 160 cedis, is going for over 400 cedis, and, if your margins are not great, I mean, that could basically just make, deplete all your margins. So then you throw in the fact that previously our government was very exposed to capital flight, and in times of uncertainty, there's flight quality, and as a result, the city has, been a free fall, and we had to take on some debt in USD because the cost of capital was much lower in USD, and every time the city falls, the cost of servicing those loans become quite burdensome. So yeah, the impact has been very wide, and it's been very painful.
I think you're illustrating the exact opposite problem of what Dave said, is that actually where there's sometimes ways to spread the risk, reduce it by going into multi-countries. Also, this whole sourcing issue actually shows how we're interconnected, and a risk in a region completely not what one would think would be an issue for an African investment has become a big issue for the whole African food supply chain. So thank you for that.
If the macroeconomic environment is not as stable, there is so much you can do to try to, de-risk it. Yeah.
So the country risk expands well beyond your single location, which is actually a very important point, which you often forget when you're looking at impact investment. So as I'm looking at the questions, there's some themes coming out here. And there's questions that are related to all of you. They're specifically directed at Gabrielle and Dave about metrics and the complications of metrics. And so on Dave's end, one person has asked, how do you also measure the carbon footprint of transportation? Does that offset any of the good you're doing by growing in the region you're growing? And then for Gabrielle, and you brought up some of this before, they're talking about the trickiness of measuring education and how you go about doing that, which actually this person contrasted to the sea cucumber. So in each of these things, we're starting to see that for every sort of action, there's a reaction that's sort of opposite on it, which makes impact investment so much more complicated. And I don't know if you're seeing a picture of Rashad, but he was shaking his head a little bit on that. So Dave, talk to us a little bit about how you are going to take into account that shipment and how you take that into account in terms of your carbon footprint. And then Gabrielle, talk to us a little bit more about the trickiness around measuring something as long-term as education. So go on, Dave.
Well, because we have a product that is so valuable, or producing a sustainable product that's so valuable. If you're filling a container, you would have, multi-million dollars of value in there, and you're not doing that with such frequency. You typically you'll have your specific buyers or your distributors, and you can take the slow boat to China or whatever. There's options now that you can offset it in that case. You have to weigh everything. It's impossible to negate all of the carbon positive activities. You can calculate it. There are ways to do that. There are firms that do that. We are very, very net negative, but of course, someone's got to put that sea cucumber product on a plane or a boat and that impact needs to be negated through what we're doing here.
Thank you. And Gabrielle, talk a little bit more. You started talking a little bit about the trickiness of measuring the impact. Talk a little bit more about some of that to us.
But Hashad can join me because it's not an easy answer. But first, trust, as I said, I think is very important. You have to start with something that is not perfect, but is good enough to start with. And I think you have to be able to join the right people to help you to find the long-term answers and improve your model and the outcomes, like the learning outcomes in my sector, specifically in the schools. So although we know we have very specific measures that is widely spread, like how many students are able to go to Ivy League schools, or how much you're able to improve the path of each student, not where they're gonna get, but how much he can improve on his own path, and how is your employability. So you have some measures that is more common sense, and of course they have some good things about that and some ones that could be improved, but I think you have a sense where you can go, and if you have this trust and the right people looking the data and trying to improve the model to have better answers, I think in the long term we will be able to find things that is not only related with hard skills, because usually when you talk in education, people are very able to address and measure the hard skills or the content or the approval rates, but also the soft skills. So about like how this person behave and what he is bringing to the society. So I think is two ways, but with trust and having answers that are not the perfect ones, but good enough to start. And also they said something that is very important, and how much you would like to spend to measure that. Because of course, I think we could have like a perfect models for social 21st century skills, or how our kids are improving like in a specific thing. But of course, this will bring a lot of complexity to the model or to any measure. And sometimes you get lost in a lot of data. Yes. I think nowadays with a lot of analytics and a lot of data science, of course, you can go wherever you want sometimes, but you have to, as a company, you always have to balance if this makes sense.
And one of the things, if anyone who's online, or if the person who's asked some of these, or some of the people who've asked these type of questions, when you learn to do anything with reporting for ESG or impact measurement, one of the most important things that we often forget, because there are so many opportunities to get all the data, you know, we can keep digging for data, but there is a cost aspect to it. And there's also a very important relevancy aspect. So there's an importance of weighting your stakeholders and who are your priority stakeholders and what measurements matter to them. And that's very easy to forget in the course of looking at impact investment when we're seeing so many numbers thrown at us today. Just because you have the numbers doesn't mean it's good. And I think sometimes we forget that. And the soft factors of how you're adding, how you're employing the local community, how you're improving the local community for people, which all your businesses do, but I would say Kwame and Dave do that in a different way. That's very important. So there's one last question I think we'll end up with, since this is called the investor perspective in terms of title, is for Rashad. And someone's curious to know if you make direct investments in growth stage startups, or if you only look at, or if you look at as a limited partner in early stage oriented ventures. And I would add to that, what would be the difference? What would make you choose one over another for people who are interested in the impact investment side?
Sure. We in our fund are looking for, I would say, a medium-sized risk profile. So we don't go for early stage, and that's something we discussed with David. there are groups that are specialized in early stage. They approach things in a different way. Their investors know this up front. We are offering our investors a medium-sized, medium-level risk. So we look for that kind of medium. So we're more for companies that are generally maybe 1 year away from being profitable. And then we find that they have basically a proven model, and then we provide them funding for their growth. So that's, I hope, clarifies. I want to just, if I may, go back for 1 minute to the previous question, because I think it's very important for us. And I hate this term, but what we're trying to avoid is greenwashing and SDG washing. So this whole set of questions about how already issues came up in David's and Gabrielle's responses. One is we need to all be transparent, to agree on indicators and then communicate. But there's also another element to this, which is increasingly there are specialized groups that do these kinds of assessment, whether it's on greenhouse gas emissions or quality of education. One of the things that gave us some comfort, Brazil has quite a sophisticated way of assessing pupil performance. There are standardized tests. I know there's a lot of controversy about standardized tests too, but at least you have some independent. And in our case, we actually get periodically some independent organization that reviews what we say. So it's credibility for us is critically important. We want to avoid being labeled as, oh, well, you're greenwashing, SDG washing. We really care very much about having an impact. And our investors increasingly are becoming very sophisticated in what they ask us. But last point, I think Gabrielle's point about the cost is real. This costs money. We have to all find the right balance here, as in many things in our lives, finding the right balance between very sophisticated, expensive ways, independent, etc. And as Gabrielle said, let's agree on something to start. It may not be perfect, but we'll learn and improve.
Yeah, thank you. And you brought up some very important points we should conclude with. Transparency is essential. And with so many different systems out there for measurement, it's so easy for transparency to get lost because people sometimes choose the system that's going to make things look best, not necessarily be as accurate. The trust between the investor and the social entrepreneur, the sustainable business is essential. To work in a partnership and collaboration, I think, is something that we often forget. And it didn't come up in this conversation, but in some of our pre-calls, it came up that sometimes as the social entrepreneur, you have to walk away from an investor because their viewpoint of the world is very different than yours. It's not just about getting the money. It is about having that mutual sense of purpose and mission and caring. So that's a beautiful way to have ended our conversation this evening, Rashad. Thank you. Appreciate it. And we appreciate our panelists, Renee and Deanne and Cornell Sebas for having this panel this evening. And most importantly, we appreciate all your time for joining us this evening. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, our information, our names and things are listed on the Cornell site. And feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn or Twitter or whatever medium you choose to use. We'd all love to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for excellent moderation. Thanks to all the organizers.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.